Welcome to this podcast. I'm Penny Crosman, technology editor at American Banker, and I'll be moderating this session on how nonprofits can grow their impact and mission and stay financially solid. I don't have to tell this audience that a lot has changed for nonprofits this year. The federal government has withdrawn support for many programs that encourage environmental sustainability and other related programs. Many corporations have stopped supporting projects and organizations that are considered woke or democratic. JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, and Goldman Sachs have all pulled out of the UN-sponsored Net Zero Banking Alliance this year, an agreement through which the banks were going to get their lending and investment portfolios to net zero emissions. But there's also reason to hope. During this week's Giving Tuesday, Americans donated about $4 billion to nonprofits, a 13% increase over 2024, and about 38 million people participated, about 20% more than the previous year. In today's session, our speakers are going to share thoughts and advice on how nonprofits can increase and broaden their impact despite headwinds, and they'll share some financial advice for nonprofits. So let's introduce our speakers. We have nonprofit leader Kate Williams, CEO of the 1% for the Planet, a group that's on a mission to get every business to give 1% of revenue to environmental solutions. The group has certified almost $1 billion in global impact. Kate, what are some of the types of environmental solutions your members are investing in?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. We focus on four impact areas, which are encompassing of essentially kind of an expanded definition of environment. And so those four impact areas are just economies, resilient communities, rights to nature, and conservation and restoration. So all of the dollars that our business members are donating essentially land in those four impact areas because all of the nonprofits that we vet that meet our criteria are categorized into those four categories.
Can you give just one example?
So one nonprofit would be Thin Green Line Foundation, and they are a nonprofit that focuses on supporting rangers who are at the front line protecting wildlife from both poachers and development encroachment. And I pick that example just because I think it's, not the kind of example that would necessarily pop to mind for most people. And I think that's an important thing to call out is there's such a diversity of ways that nonprofits are working to address the many complex environmental issues we face around the world.
And do you have a pretty tough vetting process for nonprofits? I just think people in this audience would be curious to know.
Yeah, I would call it clear, and that, for some that might be perceived as tough, but we're clear about, what it means to address solutions in those four impact areas. And then we also do, just check and make sure that we're looking at some of the kind of basic structural elements of the nonprofits. What I do know is that our business members and prospective business members have a lot of trust in their giving choices. So I know that our eligibility criteria and vetting process works because, we have a lot of satisfaction in the partnerships that are developed between our members and our nonprofit partners.
Okay, thank you. And we have Timothy Henry, who is CEO of Conscious Capitalism, which is a firm that helps CEOs and leadership teams drive purpose and empathy in their organizations. Timothy, can you kind of define conscious capitalism and give an example in real life?
Sure. Well, conscious capitalism is built around what we call our four pillars and one foundational principle. And I'll start with the foundational principle. Foundational principle is that you have a good business model and business strategy. And I think that for nonprofits, that's equally important. You need to have a strong sense of purpose. You need to have a strong way in which it is clear you have a strategy. Then, organizationally, there are four pillars that underline what makes an organization conscious. And the first one is that it's purpose driven. The second is that it's people focused. It has a conscious culture. The third is that it has a stakeholder orientation. It's looking across all stakeholders, not just shareholders, but all stakeholders. And then finally, it's led by conscious leaders, that we're not talking about greed is good Gordon Gekko types that are command and control, but we're really thinking more about servant leaders, conscious leaders, people who are looking to create environments that have high degrees of psychological safety.
Just a quick follow-up question for you. What if an organization is getting pushback from stakeholders such as regulators, board members, shareholders, and so forth, who don't want the company to appear quote unquote woke, or they're pulling back support for certain programs? How can a company or a nonprofit or a company maintain its focus when internally there's turmoil of that kind?
Well, I think there's always going to be tension among your stakeholders because that's just the nature of different people with different interests. The question always becomes one of how well do we understand what the needs are of our stakeholders? Where are their pain points? And given their pain points and their needs, how can we then creatively look for win-win solutions? So when people start pushing back, the interesting question is, why are they pushing back? What's their pain point? What is the thing that's going on inside of them that they're pushing back because of? And then getting to that root cause, starting to say, well, then let's talk about how we meet that need you have in some way that's win-win. John Mackey, the co-founder of Whole Foods, always says, if you're looking for win-lose solutions, you will find them. And the problem is that a win-win-win solution takes more time, takes creativity. And if people come back to me with it's a win-lose, it's a zero-sum game, then I would argue you haven't spent enough time dialoguing about what the opportunity is here, because behind every problem is an opportunity. And that's a mindset, and that takes creativity and patience, and dare I say, a certain level of consciousness to be able to do.
Okay. And we have Chris Castro, who is Chief Sustainability Officer at Climate First Bank. But before joining Climate First, he worked for the Biden-Harris administration from 2022 to 2025. He managed billions of dollars in grant funding. He also worked to advance President Biden's climate and clean energy goals. And he's also co-founder and president of Ideas for Us, a nonprofit working to fund projects that advance environmental action. So, Chris, you were one of the partners who launched Climate First Bank, which is a mission-driven organization. What was your goal or hope when you first started the bank?
Well, good morning. Thank you, Penny, and wonderful to be along both Kate and Tim, who I admire greatly, them and their organizations. On behalf of Climate First Bank, we're super excited to be here to talk about this opportunity. And from the inception, I think the truth is that how we manage our money, including where we bank, where we invest our retirement accounts, where we decide to spend those dollars, can either reinforce the status quo or it can accelerate systemic change. And,
Mm,
I have been in the sustainability movement for almost 20 years. Started out as a student advocate, helping out organizations like 350.org and Repowering America to raise awareness about these issues. And over time realized that, my money sitting in traditional institutions was actually going against everything that I was doing every day, every waking moment to advance positive change. And that was the whole theory of change behind Climate First Bank. How do we create a true depository institution that leverages our collective capital, our individual deposits, businesses, foundations, in order to finance the positive change that we're all looking to see in the community? The things like affordable housing and clean energy and small businesses. And so our founder, Ken LaRoe, had actually started two prior banks to Climate First. He had started Florida Choice and First Green Bank. And, one of the things that he mentioned to me when he brought me forward to be a founding director was that we were fundamentally looking to transform the business banking model to truly not just be a regular bank, but we incorporated it as a public benefit corporation and had a legal and fiduciary responsibility on not just thinking about profits, but how are we advancing positive change in the environment and for our communities. We became a certified B Corp. And really went through the rigor of a third party, verification to figure out what it would take for us to modify in terms of governance, in terms of our products and policies in order to do that. And then we started to really put our money where our mouth is and join significant institutions. We're a 1% for the planet member. So our goal is to provide 1% of our net profits to these environmental causes to advance that shared mission. So we're a proud B1. We're actually the only B1 B Corp certified and 1% for the planet bank in the world. We're also a proud member of Conscious Capitalism and this opportunity to learn from a peer network of these mission aligned businesses to understand how they're using their levers for change. And lastly, we're proud members of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. This is a global network of other institutions that are also trying to center advancing positive change through the banking business model and capitalism. So the whole concept, was really to flip the banking business model on its head and to figure out how to use an institution as a lever for change and to advance finance for good.
Mm. Okay, thank you. So let's talk about the role of nonprofits in sustainability initiatives. Kate, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that nonprofits are facing right now? And I'm also curious, why do you think Giving Tuesday did well this year?
Mhm. Yeah, and let me actually just like back up a little bit because I think what you framed around the role of nonprofits is important to name, and we've kind of suggested it, but I want to just, state it really clearly. Nonprofits play a unique role and then that they are set up, they're designed, they're structured to operate outside of the marketplace. So, the best of the nonprofits out there are seeing issues for which there's not yet or maybe never will be a market solution. And so nonprofits create work and focus that can address solutions, that are not going to be addressed through the marketplace. And so that's a really important thing to name just for the role, because then, we can talk about like what we're seeing and why it's important that we have, members like Climate First Bank who are saying, we get that and we understand that there's certain things we need to do as a business, but we also need to make sure that we're taking some of those resources we generate in the marketplace and allocate to them to solutions that the marketplace alone can address. So they're, expanding their scope of impact by doing that. And so I think, it's been great to see those results from Giving Tuesday this year. I think everyone was kind of waiting anxiously because this has been a year of so much change and in many cases challenge to nonprofits. And so, my hypothesis has been like the money is still out there, the values still exist. So, when are we going to start seeing that showing up? And so I hope that Giving Tuesday was like an early indicator of the fact that, individuals who have resources, and that can be, people who are giving $5 as well as people who are giving 5,000, 50,000, 500,000 and more, the whole spectrum that people are saying, hey, I care about issues that affect my community, that affect the future for my children, that affect my health, that affect, so many things that are really directly tied to people's lives and values. And they're saying, I want to allocate some resources there. And, in some cases that may be with the added phrase of because I'm not seeing that addressed by government or other entities in the way that I used to. But in other cases, it may be just because I care. And one of the things that I think is really important and is an important piece of 1% for the Planet's work is that, we see the environment as cutting across all dividing lines. All of us have the common ground, quite literally, of living on this planet, of, having hopes that there's a, viable future for us on this planet. And so it really creates a way that we can all come together. And again, I hope that Giving Tuesday has given us a little bit of an early indicator that people are putting dollars behind that.
Mm. Yeah, Timothy, I'm curious what you think about that. Have you seen an increase in organizations or companies giving more on like Giving Tuesday and related events? And is there a psychology behind that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, I think right now the answer is directly no. And part of the confusion is, any company trying to even create a budget for 2026 is struggling. Why? Because when you make a budget, you make assumptions. You make assumptions about your supply chains, you make assumptions about the cost of goods sold, You make assumptions about trade partners and what the US dollar is doing, etc. And right now, from a geopolitical point of view, it's very confusing. And so, in fact, what I'm seeing is many businesses sort of freezing a little bit in terms of where they're at in terms of their spending, because things are so uncertain. And uncertainty in the business world kills investment and it kills, to a certain degree, some of the philanthropy, because philanthropy in businesses is often a byproduct of the company doing well and donating some percentage of its profits. Now, what I love about Kate's organization is that they're sort of committed and they put it in, but when they have it as a discretionary item, as with many things right now, they're freezing parts of their budget because they just don't know.
Mm.
And that uncertainty is really difficult. And we can come back to that a little bit later in terms of what it means for leadership and how you run any organization. But right now, I see them freezing a little bit because
Mm.
they don't know. And and that hurts their giving, it hurts their investment, it hurts a lot of things. And that's what I'm observing.
That makes sense. Chris, what trends are you seeing in philanthropy this year?
I mean, certainly there's been a seismic shift, certainly in the recent years. I even think back to COVID and how that completely transformed the nonprofit landscape, providing a ton of disruptions in terms of funding sources changing, in terms of, community needs intensifying, and the expectations, I think, of impact from funders, I think overall, heightening and growing. Um, the interesting thing is that we are seeing kind of new strategies, new ways in which organizations are trying to adapt in this moment. And I think first, we're seeing that nonprofits and philanthropies are embracing partnerships and collaboration in a different and unique way. As an example, Climate First Bank, we've started to work with a nonprofit green bank. These are institutions that aren't depository institutions, but their whole goal is to leverage public and other sources of capital to really be catalysts, braiding and blending with other sources like bank money. And we approached a group called Montgomery County Green Bank as a way to figure out how to offer more affordable loans to households, to individuals and businesses interested in reducing their utility bills through energy efficiency, through rooftop solar, and through batteries. And that type of public-private partnership has really created a very unique model in our world. We're leveraging funding from this green bank essentially to enable these credit enhancements for our loans. And by doing that and incorporating an interest rate buy down, we're essentially taking our loan and giving it a 50% discount for every resident in that county. We're going from an 8% fixed loan to a 4% fixed loan. And even more so, if you're a low and moderate income household, it drops even further. And so, I think that there's really interesting thoughts around that. And today we've helped hundreds of households in that county over this last year of this partnership to move in that direction, to save money, to save energy, and help them save the planet as well. Second, I think we're seeing nonprofits strengthen coalitions as a way to collectively sustain the work. Both 1% for the Planet, Conscious Capitalism are really good examples of the power of unity amongst these groups and these networks. And I think to also philanthropic coalitions like Invest in Our Future is one that was lifted up over the last few years. They bring a bunch of funding organizations together around the country to think more national about advancing clean energy. And in addition, they've thought about not just using their dollars to fund, but how do we leverage those dollars to support enhancing project pipelines, to provide technical assistance for siting and permitting of these projects, and even things that are hard for banks to finance, like pre-development of these solar farms and clean energy assets. These are things that are challenging for us to deploy, right? And so strengthening coalitions is a big one. I'd say the last one that I am starting to see is this mindset adoption around being an experimentalist or being an entrepreneurial organization, testing different business models by leveraging technology to stay relevant as well. And so a good example is an organization I'm a part of called Ideas for Us. There's a urban farming program they launched called Fleet Farming, and the whole aspect was to diversify the business model and include more fee-for-service programming, and even starting a new native and edible plants nursery as a way to maintain revenues during these disruptions, right? So overall, I think we need to take note from our good friend Charles Darwin when he talked about the importance of the ability of adapting to these changing conditions, and that really leading to the ability for us to thrive. And similarly, we're thinking about that from the mindset of a nonprofit.
Okay, we're going to dive back into a couple things you mentioned, like the building coalitions and the being experimentalists. But what is fleet farming?
Fleet farming is an urban farming program, and the whole concept is it's a bike-powered, basically edible landscape solution that turns households and kind of neighborhoods into agrihoods. And the whole idea started, in my backyard of converted my front lawn into an edible landscape, thinking about the fact that over 1,500 miles of every single plate that I eat usually is traveling and the amount of energy and emissions that goes into that. And so the concept was, how do we create a hyper local urban ag program that helps, leverage assets that are underutilized like homeowner lawns and help us to meet our local food demands. And over the last 11 years, they've really done some interesting things around Central Florida to meet that goal.
Mm, I love that. I have my own little raised vegetable bed, but in a very small way. I
Wonderful.
definitely relate to that. So, Kate, Chris just mentioned a number of wins that he's been seeing. What are some wins that you've been seeing nonprofits have in the past, year or so?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to reframe the question a little bit because I think the biggest win that I've seen is that our renewal rate for our members, so our existing business members who have made the 1% commitment, has been really high this year. And that means that we have certified more dollars going to nonprofits, even at a time when, to your point, Timothy, there's this like kind of breadth and depth of uncertainty that makes it really hard to make those kinds of commitments. But we're seeing our companies really double down. And so that is, such a argument for or case for a lot of what Chris is talking about in terms of those coalitions of like putting cross-sector mindsets and frameworks and entities together to make sure that even when the going gets tough, even when things are really uncertain and it's hard to plan, and there are some, very real headwinds, we continue to gain momentum and, figure out how we can continue to, find a path forward. So I think, the biggest success that I would want to point to that, we are connected to is that level of continued commitment from businesses who are operating in this very challenging environment. And what that means then for our nonprofit partners in our network is that they are able to, at a time when other funding sources have become less certain, have lean into partnerships that have been in place. Or gain new partnerships through our member program to secure funding.
And Timothy, it seems like some of your work is helping companies kind of find and drive their sense of purpose and also things like empathy in leadership. Are you seeing wins among companies trying to do that? And if so, what's kind of helping that along?
Well, let's go back to this topic of what I call radical uncertainty, right? We live in a world right now where geopolitically, we don't know what's going on. And we live in this world where, um, we have massive technological disruption occurring. We focus right now a lot of discussion on AI. But over the next few years, quantum computing and robotics and nanotechnology and material science and biotechnology and health sciences, and the combination of these things is creating tremendous disruption in business models and in society. And this kind of uncertainty is not going to go away. It's not like COVID. We hope it'll be over in a year or two. This is the world we're going to be living in for the next 3 to 5 years. So when you step back from that, you say, how do I prepare an organization, whether it's for profit or not for profit? I'm not going to have answers like in 6 months from now. It's not like everything's going to be clearer. And, in 12 months from now, we'll all know what AI is doing because even the AI people are saying, we don't know. where exactly that's going to go. And is there a bubble? And will it burst? And what will, all of that is incredibly uncertain. So in a time of uncertainty, one of the questions is, how do you manage that? Right. And we view purpose as being your true north. It's a little bit like we're in really stormy seas. And when you're in a stormy sea, you still want to be heading through your true north. So your purpose is in many ways more important than ever to go back to and say, why do we exist? What is our purpose for being an organization? What are we actually trying to do? So that when we start to make those decisions, we're doing it within the context of our purpose. I mean, in that sense, purpose and values have never been more important because we don't know. And your strategy is going to shift in your approach to your customers or your clients is going to shift radically, and you don't know. So you need to be able to steer by some core basics and go back. So that's where the purpose part comes in now as very important. So we talk
Mm.
about the need for freedom within a framework. You've got to give, as Chris said, your frontline people this ability to be experimentalists, to be trying new things and exploring. Well, you want them to do that, but within a framework, and the framework is your purpose and values. And like, as the chairman of Patagonia, when we spoke with him, he sort of said, we want everybody to be experimentalists, but you know what? We want you to look at everything through the context of, is this in alignment with our purpose and our values? And if it isn't, then you're making the wrong decision.
Mm.
Um, so I think in the purpose side, that's really important. The other side you talked about was about leadership. And listen, if you want to have experimentalists, if you want to be trying lots of things, then you're going to fail sometimes.
Mm.
It's not going to work every time. Everybody's not going to hit a home run every time you try something new. So it's got to be okay to fail. It's got to be okay to try, learn, and fail and make it okay. I was
Mm.
really touched by somebody we had at Google on one of our podcasts saying that in his group, they celebrate the Day of the Dead. And we were saying, Day of the Dead, yeah, are you like Mexican or something? Or what's that got to do? And he said, no, it's the day we bring all our failed projects for the last year together and we celebrate the failures. We failed. Look at this. And what did you learn? So, what allows people to feel good about being able to try and learn and fail? Psychological safety, right?
Mm.
You've got to feel like this is a safe environment for me. I have to have a high level of trust with the leadership that I'm working with. So how do you develop that? You
Mm.
develop that through empathy and care and what we call conscious leadership. So a
Mm.
leader who can now, instead of being in a command and control mode, is in an align and allow mode is a very different leadership model. And so empathy and caring are part of that allowing, are part of that holding and allowing, aligning and allowing. So that's where those things fit together in terms of you've got to be able to steer towards your true north, towards your purpose. And as a leader, you've got to be able to hold the space for
Mm.
people to be experimenting and learning fast because the day of the decider at the top is gone.
So an experimentalist is someone who's willing to try things even though they might fail, and then when they fail, they move on. And is that more important in the people at the top, or is it more important in lower, all levels
Which
of an
child do you
organization?
love more?
Yeah.
It's like the answer is yes,
Way to put that.
right? I mean, if you as a leader are not okay with uncertainty, you're in trouble nowadays, right? You're going to mentally lose it. Your mental wellness will be suffering horribly if you're somebody who has to have certainty. So, how we make decisions as teams, and it's where teams are even more important, whether the team is at the front line or the team at the top, the ability to mobilize team thinking and get the best discussion going on about what's working and what's not working is incredibly important. So, as the
Mhm.
leader, you have to be open to that and you have to be able to support a team to be able to do that. And that's true at the top and it's true at the front line. So, this is where diversity of opinion, people feeling safe on a team, feeling that they included and they belong on that team. Those kinds of things are pretty fundamental to having a team be a
Hmm.
high efficiency team from a trust and performance point of view. So I think it occurs at both levels and at all levels in an organization. And it's why we go back to saying an organization can't be more conscious than the level of consciousness of its leaders. And it's just as simple as that. If leaders at the top are not demonstrating and are not walking the talk on this, it's really hard to ask people at the front lines to walk this talk and do this kind of thing.
Mm, it's very interesting. So just to round out this discussion about nonprofits' role in the world, Kate, why do you see nonprofits as best or well positioned uh, to help with sustainability or to achieve sustainability, versus government and corporate, which are, you know, declining their support?
Hmm. We actually, our view is that we need all of them, and because they all play different roles. So, a nonprofit may be focused on a tiny plot of land that, has some of the last uh, of a certain type of wild plant. It might be hard to find a market for that. So it would be hard to put up a company around that and could potentially also create the wrong incentives around that. What if, it's just needed to ensure that we don't lose that last of that species, before it's had a chance to, flourish and for us to learn about its values in the world. So that's maybe not the greatest example, but to, try and just make the point that a nonprofit can exist to preserve things like biodiversity before we even can put a market value on that. And perhaps, because we don't want to have to put a market value on that, because that is something that contributes to the overall health and diversity of the planet in ways that are beyond our ability to fully understand. So just to really underscore, nonprofits play that unique role and enable us to expand the scope of how we're defining impact. I do want to be very clear, though, that our point is not that nonprofits are the best. Our point is that nonprofits play a unique role that merits being funded because that contributes to a healthier planet and healthier communities. We need all of it. We need for businesses to play their part because businesses, if they're left out of the equation, if they're not thinking in the ways that Chris is describing, we're just going to set ourselves up to have this ongoing tension of business creating problems for the planet and solely driven by like Milton Friedman and Gordon Gekko. Timothy, you mentioned, so what we need to do is say, okay, there's a role for business. One of those roles set up by 1% for the planet is allocate resources to nonprofits. Many other roles, exist, greening your supply chain, making internal operational investments that reduce your overall, carbon or, broader footprint. Really developing that holistic mindset that Timothy's talking about so that as you move forward, you see things differently. And then government, I think, plays a expanding and contracting role, imperfectly, but importantly to provide a context for all of that. And, we see what happens and that it can happen quickly when that changes. So I do think the last point I'll make on this is I think building resilience across the business and nonprofit sectors is really, really important because for the most part, those are the steady through lines for change across the planet. In terms of society, in terms of environment, in terms of, a lot of things. And so the more resilience and focus that we can build across those two sectors, the better we can, withstand for the, health and vibrancy of future generations, the invariable changes that are going to happen in political systems where, there's always going to be a swing, whether it's greater or lesser, that we've seen that change over time. But I do think resilience across the business and nonprofit sectors, the total private sector is a really important feature. And, that's why, I think things like 1% for the planet, other conscious capitalism are really important because we're units of building that resilience.
So you and Chris both talked about these partnerships between companies and nonprofits. What have you learned in your work from your work in about building alliances between corporates and nonprofits?
I'll speak first, Chris, and then you can certainly chime in. I mean, I think what I've seen is that While we often think of philanthropy as, money slash power flowing to nonprofits, what we see is that the power is really going both ways and that that's the way we want to see these partnerships. So, like our organization, we're a nonprofit. When we work with our member companies, we see that they have so much to offer, in terms of allocating those resources to nonprofits, but we also see them, and in the best partnerships, this is very true. And I would say Climate First certainly embodies this. They're also, learning from and with their nonprofit partners. So again, there's this like uh, kind of equality that is part of these relationships when they work well. It's not just a money is power. So, we're the dominant force in the relationship. It's more, that the money is a certain resource, the ability to drive impact, to operate outside of the marketplace, to be beholden to purely to a mission is, a power and resource that the nonprofit has, and also that knowledge on the ground. So, Chris, it sounds like, when you started, eating your yard, you had the opportunity to learn a lot with, partners to create something that could be bigger than just that. And I'm guessing you were very open to that learning. And so that made your ability to take that first step enhanced by those nonprofit partnerships. And we see that all the time and hear from our members that, their nonprofits are often the push that gets them to do the next thing beyond just their giving. And so, again, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of, and the true resilience is embodied when businesses and nonprofits are equal partners in the changes that they're seeking to drive.
That was
Chris,
well
anything
said.
to add about that or about banks and financiers' role in sustainability projects?
Definitely. I mean, I think Kate, you nailed it on the importance of those types of collaborations. I think it is important for us to think about where do banks and funders really play in this space. And first, I think it's important that we start to reframe what we think about for banking, right? Traditionally, it's been seen as this kind of back office function. Really, it's important to think about as part of the supply chain. And this is something that we're starting to articulate to many of our businesses is that, how you hold your money and what you do with your money is a significant piece of your finances, but also how you advance your mission. As I
Mm.
mentioned earlier, every dollar that's sitting in a checking account is doing something. It's either funding extractive industries and things that we don't want, or it's fueling positive impact. And our idea of this bank is to be that institution, be one of those institutions that is using our capital for good. So I think by choosing values aligned banks, nonprofits can ensure that their deposits are supporting things that probably their mission is aligned with and things that are complementary to their mission. And this is a big part of using banking as a mission tool. And for those who care about emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, that being, there's an incredible study by a nonprofit called Topo Finance. They published a report called the Carbon Bankroll 2.0 report. So every couple of years, they start looking at the financed emissions of our dollars sitting in these
Mm.
different banks. And the fact of the matter is that for most businesses, the financed emissions is dozens of times more than their scope one and scope two, operational emissions
Mm.
for their business. And it's because that money is being leveraged to things behind their back that is extremely carbon intensive. And so I think that's a really important piece is that, our banking is a piece of the supply chain and a piece of our carbon solution. If you are looking about what banks are values aligned. I mentioned earlier GABV and its members, and really encourage everyone on the call to look up their members and to look at and see if there are banks that align with what you're looking at. Um, and then I'd say the obvious around, finding institutions that can support nonprofits and businesses financially, that being offering accounts that eliminate fees and transaction charges and minimum balance requirements. These are all things that really do add up quickly. And the savings could be redirected to your programs and to impactful initiatives. And that's something that we pride ourselves at Climate First Bank. We really tried to figure out, when we were starting this, how do we create banking products that really do support small and mid-sized enterprises, NGOs that are aligned, and businesses that ultimately are trying to advance positive change. And so those are a couple of ways that I think bankers and funders are also a key piece of the transition.
Okay, and
Chris,
we're
you're
going
so
to double.
inspiring. I'm inspired by what you're saying. Way to go.
And
It's
Penny, if
huge.
I
Yeah.
could just like hop in with one sort of additional piece to show the way coalitions or collaborations are really valuable is one of the things that we started doing as we learned about like topo finance and climate first, and I spent time with Ken LaRoe, one of the other founders of Climate First Bank, and one of the things that we did is even though it's not something that we certify as part of our model, we shared this way of thinking and with our members, and there's a huge amount of interest. So we, the connection through our particular model, giving to nonprofits, gives us the opportunity to build a community where we can start to have other conversations. Like, okay, if you care about where your money is going with your nonprofits, let's make sure that the where your dollars are sleeping at night is aligned with those values. And that was a real like, head exploding emoji for almost everyone, myself included. And that goes for the nonprofits too. Like a lot of them, there's a lot of dollars sitting in, nonprofit deposit accounts. And, having that align with their missions is really important. And so that's an example of how building this community, we then have these amazing opportunities to influence. And I could say the same, Timothy, for what you're doing. We're able to also bring in and connect our nonprofit and business leaders to ideas of conscious capitalism and things like that. So I think the coalitions often come together around particular purposes, but then create the opportunity for much bigger, powerful conversations.
Okay, great. And we do want to go back to the financial discussion, but we have a couple of questions from the audience, which I figure I'll put out here. So one is, in the current reality where federal funding has been dramatically reduced and many city nonprofit partnerships have stalled, what practical financial strategies and policy tools can local governments use to, one, keep critical nonprofit services alive, and two, co-create sustainable mission-aligned funding models with nonprofits despite these budget constraints? So a simple question.
Wow.
Who wants to tackle that?
I mean,
Yikes.
I'll
Well,
take a crack at, oh, sorry, Chris, do you want
please
to go?
go for it, Kate.
Okay, I'll be brief because this, I don't have, I certainly don't have a silver bullet, but, I live in the state of Vermont, which is small enough that we can kind of see some of the different moving parts, which is helpful. It does not mean we solve everything, but it does mean that sometimes it's a little easier to see how you might navigate the landscape. And, one of the things that I've seen that has worked in Vermont is that kind of back to the same theme is cross-sector relationships and partnerships really help. So like, government speaking with the community foundations, like, hey, there's this big gap. We're seeing this influence like social service nonprofits. Is there a way that the community foundation, which is able to access, individual dollars, is there a way they can put up a program to help? So, we had Hurricane Irene back in the day, and that's, different than what we're facing right now, but it was another enormous shock to the system. And we saw very effective government, private sector partnerships that enabled us to, kind of navigate again imperfectly, but navigate in a way that if, it wasn't neither sector alone could handle it. So I know that's not a complete answer, but I do think like looking outside of kind of the normal channels of communication, knowledge, resource is really important.
Yeah, I double tap on that. The partnerships with the place-based foundations are absolutely essential. When I was at the city of Orlando, we were thinking about this exact question. What types of local laws and policy might we be able to enact in order to enable financing and resources in our communities? And a couple of them come to mind. When we're talking about advancing in clean energy, a lot of local governments use this tool, PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, as a financing mechanism. It starts to bring private capital into a community and offer building owners the opportunity of kind of offsetting their upfront costs to make these improvements and creatively pay them back over the property taxes. We've also, local governments partner with local CDFIs, community development finance institutions. Most of those help with building affordable housing type projects. But I will say CDFIs are starting to to change and modify how they do their work. And one of them in Florida that we really love is a group called SELF, or Solar and Energy Loan Fund, that essentially decided to take the CDFI business model and provide low interest loans to LMI households in order to make improvements to their energy situation, right, and address the energy burden. And so at the city, we provided, funding for that organization to establish themselves in the region, build out their contractor network, and begin to offer residents the ability of accessing those dollars to improve their homes. And so those are some tools. I'd say, lastly, partnerships with the utility. And this is a challenging one, depending on the market that you're in. Some utilities are really open to figuring out ways to collaborate using on-bill financing, using some of their resources to help with those types of investments. Some of them are less challenging, but or more challenging. But I will say utility partnerships, even as you look to maybe negotiate future franchise agreements with the utilities that service your area, those are opportunities to start talking about public benefit charges, or ways in which you can establish funds that ultimately can be used to support organizations, or blended and braided with private capital to then offer these types of credit enhancements that I talked about earlier, right? In Montgomery County, Maryland, as an example. So those are a couple of ways in which local governments can really help address the moment.
Mm. Okay, great. And another question for you, Chris. What is a key linchpin that drives a sustainably conscious or leaning company to make the switch to a better bank like Climate First or others? What actually brings them and their money across the line, especially when they may depend on credit lines from their bank partner, uh, to operate or expand in the near and longer terms? So, like, what brings
Yeah.
people to Climate First?
I think that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I think people are looking for banks these days that have the biggest interest yielding accounts. And we pride ourselves that we have some of the highest interest rate accounts because we're a fast growing bank. And what that means is we need capital in order to fund these impact loans, and deposits are the way that we do that. And so we have some of the highest rates, I think, first and foremost. Secondly, it's about customer service, and it's about getting that type of white glove, approach that a community bank offers, but at a national scale. And because of our ability of leveraging digital technology, today, Climate First Bank is operating in all 50 states. We have physical branches across Central Florida, but we have accounts in every state in the country and some of our territories. And that flexibility and use of modern technology really is meeting the mark for a lot of businesses. And then I'd say, if those businesses do have relationships with their existing banks, they might have lines of credits. Those are things that we are totally interested in exploring and maybe even enhancing as you all look to make the move. We just recently did that for a wealth management company that focuses on sustainable investments, and they had a relationship with their local bank, but they really loved the values alignment and a number of the products we offered here at Climate First, and they decided to move their full banking relationship, and we increased their line of credit that they had with their traditional bank. And so it's important to note that although our specialty and focus is on advancing sustainability through finance, we are a full service bank, and we're helping people get residential mortgages, commercial building lines of credits, and expand small businesses. And the whole goal is to upsell sustainability and these types of solutions in every single product line that we're offering at the bank. But knowing that we're needing to be as diverse as possible to meet the mark of customers across the board.
All right.
And
And we have
Penny,
one
again,
more.
if I
Okay.
can just chime in as a bank client who like also as a for 1% for the planet, we went through this decision process. And I think a couple of pieces of like learning advice that I would offer. One is don't think you have to do it all as one big step. Like don't think that it's like you're going to take every treasury that you're dealing with and move it all at once. Try some things. So we like took, a portion of some of our deposit accounts and moved them after we went through an RFP process. And then, actually when Climate First Bank was able to expand to 50 states, which was important to us, we were able to move some more to them. So, take some steps because I think then you learn what you really need. Like how important is customer service to your account team? Usually really important. A lot of, banks have better or worse. And so you can sort of sort for that. So that's one thing I would offer is just like break it down and take some steps because usually, most companies can do that even if they're still, managing through a certain line of credit, there's some other cash that they can move. And
That's a clear.
that's an important step. Another thing too, and Topo Finance is one of our nonprofit partners, and I've spent quite a bit of time with Paul, the founder, and one of the things that he's really shared, because he sees the big picture and he knows there actually are not enough banks right now for all of the deposits that we would want to move. So there's also a role to play to influence your existing bank. So take the time to ask for what you want at your existing bank. So if you have a great line of credit, if you like the person you're banking with, and that's all working, but you're unhappy with some of the underlying investments, ask about it and say, hey, this really matters. I'm considering moving our money. This is what I would want to see, because we do need to influence all banks to start moving in the right direction, because otherwise we're not going to have enough of the sort of banking opportunities that we need to really get all the money flowing in the right directions.
That's a good point. And someone just wrote in and said, I am pleased to say I became a customer of Climate First Bank this week, moved by the goal to leverage financial services to invest for the common good. And we have another question from the audience. This person says, thank you so much for an engaging session. It's great to hear founders' thoughts on these issues. Can you speak to what is something that an NPO can offer in exchange for a partnership, which would be meaningful from your perspectives? Is it visibility, delivering tangible results, something else? Timothy, do you have a take on that?
Well, I always look for what I call shared value. So if you're a not-for-profit and you're looking out at the world and sort of saying, given our mission and our purpose, who might some of the stakeholders be in our marketplace that we could work with and start to see, is there an opportunity here for us to create shared value? So I'll give you a funny example. One of my favorite chocolate companies in the US, Tony Chocolonely. If you haven't been aware of them, you should. A public benefit, a B Corp, and just an amazing business overall. But one of the things that they do is they work directly with the farmers and in a place like Côte d'Ivoire and in Ghana. And as they do that, they pay two or three times more for their product than they do for some of their than some of their competitors do. And why do they do that? They do that because in the long term, a lot of people in like a place like Ghana, they're not passing the farms on to the next generation because they can't make a living. And so there you are saying, hey, we need to pay these people really a living wage for what they do. And we need to partner with the nonprofits that are in that area that are helping do community building and make sure that they're getting education, that they're getting access to health clinics, et cetera, many of which are in the not-for-profit sector. So it's a great example of them coming in and saying, okay, we're going to help give these people the money so they can invest in their local communities. And can we find partnerships with local not-for-profits or global not-for-profits that are trying to do that kind of stuff in the communities where we're working? And therefore, we create shared value. We lift the whole community up because we're working on the economics, we're working on the health, and we're working on the education. That's a kind of example where you're looking for shared value. How can you work together to create a better outcome by working with others?
That makes sense. So we promised to give some financial advice. So I want to ask each of you, uh, what is some advice you could give either for how nonprofits can diversify their revenue streams or just how they can remain financially healthy while pursuing their, broader goals? Um, I don't know. Maybe Chris, do you want to go first with
Sure.
that?
Yeah, I think one financial tool that a lot of organizations overlook is the product called a cash sweep account at banks. At Climate First, we call this our demand deposit marketplace or DDM product. And the idea is that nonprofits often hold large sums of money temporarily, or sometimes longer term. Kate was mentioning that. Think grant distributions, think donor contributions, think reserves that you're waiting on to be deployed. And instead of letting that money sit idle in a checking account, earning almost nothing, these cash sweep accounts automatically move these excess funds into these interest-bearing accounts overnight. And they do a couple of things. They immediately give you a
Mhm.
financial impact, right? Now your idled cash is starting to work for you and provide some type of interest income. Secondly, It provides a level of safety and resilience for your money, right? These often are spread across multiple institutions. So we work with a whole network of banks that are FDIC insured, and it goes beyond your traditional 250,000, right? In insurance, it can insure the full amount. Our DDM product insures up to $50 million for organizations. And we're starting to see philanthropies and family offices say, actually, that's a really, really enticing product. And I'd say third, it's simple to use, right? Unlike your traditional investments, cash sweeps basically, are minimal management and often are automated. And so very simple way for nonprofits, with lean financial teams to be able to kind of maximize their dollars. And so I'd encourage you to talk to your bank and financial partners about what solutions they're offering. And certainly, if you're looking for mission aligned banks, certainly consider what we're offering here as very high interest accounts.
Kate, any financial advice for nonprofits?
I think, there's nothing new that I would say. It's kind of the basics. I think this year has been a lesson in like have a reserve so that you can weather there will always be storms. And so I think nonprofits that have made sure that they don't just say, hey, we had a good year, but really are, essentially budgeting to build a reserve. It really, really can matter because a lot of times you will need to, to Timothy's point, you're going to need to navigate times of great uncertainty, and you may need to figure out some new revenue streams. And it's good to have diverse revenue streams always, but you can't just like snap your fingers and immediately have a new revenue stream. You need a cushion to enable you to do that. So I think, again, that's like basic kind of financial management, but it's important to state that. And I think for nonprofit leaders, work with your boards. 1% for the Planet has a 12-month reserve guideline. We do not always hit that. And I will just share that this year has been a challenging year. So we've had to, dip below that, but we are able to, navigate our way through and stay strong, especially, which is so important to us because we're here for the long term. So I do think, having a relationship with your board where you can really set those goals together so you can work on budgets and financial management towards that.
All right, Timothy, last word. How can nonprofits and other companies maintain their sense of purpose, their hope, their dedication, consistency amidst all the uncertainty you talked about and the difficulties that Kate mentioned?
Yeah, I don't think there's any silver bullet, but I do
Mhm.
think that increasingly building organizational resilience and innovation is critical. And so now more than ever, leadership and people matter. So I keep going back to how do we create an environment where there's a high level of trust, high level of engagement, and a high level of psychological safety among my people so that I can enable people to experiment and be experimentalists. And now more than ever, because I can't tell you what the world's going to look like in 12 months. I probably never was able to do it, but now I really can't do it, and nobody can. So, building that organizational capacity to be able to do that and developing the leaders that can hold that space for the organization has never been more important. So, continually focus and ask yourself, are we creating the right kind of environment where we can be disruptive? And that's my final statement is if you're not thinking how to be disruptive in how your model works and the way you're working, the status quo is dead. That's all I can tell you. It is disruption. It's continual disruption. Create the organizational environment where you can navigate that as well as possible.
Mm. All right, great. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but Timothy Henry, Chris Castro, Kate Williams, I thought this was very interesting. I feel like I learned a lot. We're getting a lot of great comments from the audience as well. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all of you who joined. And I hope you enjoyed this session.
Thank you. Great to
Thanks,
see you all.
everyone.
Thank you. Be well.
Bye.